If your goal is to make a subwoofer enclosure that both looks and sounds amazing, this is the video for you. I've already done all the woodworking, the cutting, and the router work, but stay tuned and I'll tell you more about that process later on in the video. This video is going to focus on the assembly, wrapping the enclosure, and testing the enclosure. I don't know about you, but for some reason I always start my enclosures by attaching the back to the bottom. The box itself is held together with wood glue and brad nails. In this shot here, you can see that I'm using a few clamps. Clamps are extra hands. I use them to hold everything together while I drive brad nails. In fact, before I got a brad nailer, I just clamped and glued all my enclosures. I know a lot of people like to glue and screw their enclosures. That is stronger, but it's also a lot slower and it's complete overkill for a box like this. If this were a big SPL build with multiple 18s, it would be worth the trouble. The build uses a pair of Dayton Audio reference subwoofers. These are the dual 4-ohm 10-inch subwoofers. Rumor has it that these are some of the best sound quality subs on the market. They allegedly have very low distortion. I'll give you my opinion about that at the end of the video. Hey, here's a little tip for you. In this shot right here, you can see a piece of scrap wood that I'm using to make sure the sides of the enclosure are gonna sit flush with the back and the bottom of the enclosure. For this build, the plans call for a pair of 3-inch precision ports. I'll make sure to give you a link to the ports and the subwoofers down in the video description. And the plans will tell you how long you need to make the ports. At this stage right here, you want to go ahead and cut the ports to length so that you can test fit this piece right here. This is the port support. A port support is not 100% necessary, but I always like to include one anytime I use a round port because I want to make sure the port is secure inside the enclosure. And this port support needs to be sized so you have plenty of clearance for the subwoofer itself. These subs are slightly more than 5¼ inch deep. From there, you want to go ahead and add the main brace. And here's one of those spots where you want to stop, do some measuring, make sure you've got this brace in the best location possible. You want it as far away from the end of the port as possible without interfering with the speaker cutouts. The plans linked below will show you the approximate location, but again, you want to test and verify this when you're building the enclosure. When you're ready to glue and nail that brace into the enclosure, the smart thing to do is to trace out the location on the outside of the box. I didn't do that, but I really should have taken the time to take that step. Now the internals are sorted out, and when that's done, you can lay down the baffle and follow that by the top of the box. And if you just want a functional enclosure that's gonna sound good, you really could stop right here. But I want more than that, and really you should too. So I've made a second baffle that's got an oversized cutout so the subwoofer will sit recessed into the enclosure. This is completely an aesthetic decision. It's just done so the box looks good. You could just double up on the baffle so that you've got a nice, thick, heavy-duty baffle and skip that recess. But hopefully the extra effort of cutting that recess and putting a round over on the recess will improve the finished look of the box. And on top of that baffle, I'm going to glue and nail on this trim ring right here. I'm calling this the outer trim ring. The plan is to wrap the front of this box in some combination of carpet and vinyl. Before I do that, I want to take a minute to hit the box with some black paint. Any place where there may be a scene or a transition, this black paint will help camouflage mistakes. I find that works really well if I'm using a black carpet, but not quite as well in this case where I'm going to be using a charcoal carpet. I build enough boxes now where I just buy this in bulk from Parts Express. I've had a few people ask me about the spray gun that I'm using here. This is just a cheap Harbor Freight spray gun. If you keep an eye out on their sale flyers, you can literally pick one of these things up for 10 bucks. The other tip, make sure you've got a decent air compressor. I've been using a 6-gallon 150 PSI pancake compressor, but it could only deliver 2.6 CFM, and that just wasn't enough flow to use the sprayer effectively. I had to upgrade to a larger compressor. 4.3 CFM seemed to do the trick. And the worst part about this part is the waiting. After you spray the box and the carpet, you got to give it a few minutes to tack up. You don't want to rush this process. And after it's tacked up, you can just stick the two pieces together. You can see in this shot here that I masked off the inner baffle before spraying it with adhesive. I'm not quite ready to get a bunch of adhesive on that part. And after wrapping the carpet over the front, the next step is to cut out some relief cuts in that carpet and start pressing it down over the roundover on that outer trim piece. When I was doing the woodworking in the previous video, I hit it with a roundover and a rabbit groove underneath it. Both of those things are going to make it easier to wrap and improve the look. This is my favorite tool for doing carpet work. It's one of these breakaway razor knives, but the end has this little metal pry bar on the end of it, so I can use one tool to cut and tuck the carpet. Flip the box over, spray some more adhesive on the back of the box, and you're gonna have two ends of the carpet. Just fold those over the top of each other and take a really good sharp blade and cut both pieces of carpet at the same time. And when you do this, the two pieces are going to mate with each other perfectly, and you'll have a nice invisible seam right here. I probably had to practice this a dozen times before the seam really did look invisible. For the sides, back when I was doing the woodworking part, I added a rabbited groove to the side pieces, and that groove now becomes a guide for your knife when you trim out the carpet on the side. And hey, now you're at another point where you could just stop and install the subs, the ports, and the terminal cup, wire it all together, and be on your way. You don't have to go through all these extra steps, but every time I build a box, I try to make it better than the last one. If I don't challenge myself, how am I gonna get any better? So I'm gonna add some gray vinyl to the front of the enclosure. You can see here that I did spray the back side of the vinyl and the baffle of the enclosure with some adhesive. So now I just lay that piece of vinyl down, grab the knife, make some relief cuts, and grab the heat gun. Don't try it without a heat gun. As I hit it with the heat gun, the vinyl just molds right into place on that roundover with virtually no effort. From there, I push the vinyl under that lip on the outer trim ring and trim that out with a sharp knife. Now I'm going to add an inner trim ring, so I'm going to spray some adhesive on that trim ring. You can see in this shot right here that the ring has a rabbited groove on both sides. That's to give you a spot to stick the vinyl when you're wrapping it. With some relief cuts and the heat gun, this step was actually pretty easy. And this is literally the first time I've tried to wrap a trim ring like this. And to be honest, I thought it was gonna be a lot harder, but it did take a lot of time and it took a lot of prep work. But after investing the time into the prep work, it wasn't that bad. In this shot here, you can see that I did get some adhesive on the front side of that vinyl. You can clean that up with mineral spirits. It wiped right off. And with that done, the snap ring just presses right into place. The fit was a bit snug, which is really what you want. You want it to stay in place. Well, how did I get such a tight fit? Well, I used the Car Audio Fabrication material gap gauge and tool set. This was literally my first time using it. It was a lot of work, but I just followed the steps that Mark showed in his videos and it worked flawlessly. I can see a few imperfections in my work. That just means I need to build some more sub boxes. Practice makes perfect. And hey, I want to take a second to give a big shout out to Mark with Car Audio Fabrication. I've been watching his videos for years and he's the one who inspired me to start amassing tools and building my own boxes. Several other YouTubers have inspired me over the years, such as Nick with Toyd's DIY Audio. In fact, Nick and I actually do a live stream on Monday nights at about 7:30 Central. We'd love to see you in the chat on the live show sometime. And hey, while I'm giving out the shout outs, I need to let my patrons know how much I appreciate their support. I literally could not afford the tools needed to do this kind of work without the support of those patrons. People like Bo, Dylan, Fargo, Gaddy, JD America, David, and Baba. Plus these guys here at the bottom of the screen and the rest of the crew over on Patreon. If you'd like to join me on Patreon and show your support for DIY audio content, it would mean a lot to me. Moving on to the ports. These are ABS plastic and you want to use an ABS cement when gluing them all together. My local big box store stocks an all-purpose plastic cement that will get the job done. Now the tricky part is you can't just assemble the port outside of the enclosure and slide it in because that inner opening has a big flare on it as well. So what you want to do is stick those flares together outside of the box and then reach into the speaker cutouts to finish gluing everything together. The one thing I don't like about these ports is the inside end doesn't have screw holes, so I tend to just glue these to the port support. This time I'm using some epoxy, I think it's JB Weld. After trying this out, I have to say that I don't recommend using it. It's strong enough and it will stick to both the wood and the ABS, but it is a little bit runny. I'm gonna recommend hot glue instead. And after using all these adhesives inside the box, you're gonna wanna wait for them to cure before installing the subs. I don't know for sure that this stuff will release any gases during the curing process that might damage the subwoofers, but why take that chance? Hey, and as you're growing your tool collection, get a cheap set of center punches. Use these to mark out the screw locations on the baffle. When I first started doing this, I used to just drill pilot holes with the speakers resting in the cutouts, and that just increases the chance of drilling a hole through the speaker. After wiring everything in parallel for 1 ohm load, I screwed the subs down, and here I've got the multimeter and you can see that it reads just over 1 ohm. That's normal. This black box right here is one of my favorite tools. I use it to verify the tuning frequency. Looks like it landed right around 33 Hertz. That's gonna give me a nice musical enclosure. And hey, here's the finished box, and it looks absolutely amazing. But how does it sound? Well, it's really hard to convey the sound quality over YouTube. You just kind of have to take my word for it. Loud bass tends to clip the microphones, and oftentimes all you really can hear is the vehicle rattling. But here's a clip anyway. One of my favorite test tracks is the first track from Techmaster PEB's album, It Came From Outer Bass. It opens with some really brutal low notes that are well below the tuning frequency, and that causes the subwoofers to unload, meaning the subs are moving as if they were in free air. And since the frequencies are low enough that they're on the edge of human hearing, that's when you'll be able to detect mechanical noise coming from the subwoofers, and these things were really quiet. All I could hear was the truck rattling. And after playing a few test tracks and some of my favorite songs, I can honestly say that these are some of the lowest distortion subwoofers that I've ever had. I'm not getting mechanical noise, I'm not getting distortion, I'm not getting any port noise. So no doubt in my mind that this is both the best looking and best sounding subwoofer enclosure that I've ever built. If you'd like to learn more about the woodworking process, click on this video right here. To catch the next video, click right here and subscribe so that you don't miss it. I'm Justin, this is the DIY Audio Guy YouTube channel, and I will see you on the next one.